Hello there my Gummy Knights and welcome back to the Echo Chamber. Now today we're going to be getting into a brand new what if, and it's going to be what if Goku obtained the Ikari form. I kind of want to add my own unique little spin on this take because I know that some people have already done this type of topic, but I kind of want to add my own little unique spin, and I hope that you guys do enjoy it. Now before we actually get into the what if, I want to let you guys know that one of my last videos that I put up ended up being the April Fool's video and what if Bulma killed Goku. Now I know that was kind of more of a joking video, and so you guys didn't really have to expect it to carry over into a whole nother series, but I still kind of want to revisit that topic per se if it was an option on the table. And the way it can be an option on the table is if you guys go and show your interest for the video. So like you would do for this video, like, favorite, subscribe, share that video around if you wanted to continue into a series. Now, if you don't, that's perfectly fine. We can go ahead and continue with the brand new series that we're going to be getting into now, which once again is what if Goku obtained the Ikari form. And so without further ado, let's go on and get into it. Alrighty gang, and so to lay out some of the groundwork for the premise of this series, like I said, we're going to be having Goku obtain the Ikari form, but rather than do it the usual way that people might go about it, which has him either obtaining it during some early point at Dragonball, most likely during the Red Ribbon, or even the King Piccolo arcs, or heck, even at the end of Dragon Ball. I think that some people may have already done that. I'm actually going to put it towards the beginning of Z. Now, I know that some people have also probably done the topic to where it is based around the idea of doing it in the Saiyan Saga, which we're going to kind of be keeping here towards setting up for this premise, but it's not going to be the usual spot that people put it at during the Saiyan Saga, which is usually during the tail end of the Saiyan Saga, where he's going up against Vegeta, or he's going up against Nappa, and then Goku obtains the form, or he has the form, or he managed to do it during training, he discovered it and things of that nature. So we're actually going to have him have the form a bit earlier than that. And pretty much we're going to have the same type of catalyst, because when it comes to the Ikari form, we don't know everything about the form, but we do know the general information about it is as essentially the grade 8 power, but in your humanoid form. So that way you don't have to actually transform into a grade 8. And so the reason why this can work with somebody like Goku, or really any Saiyan in general, is because there was nothing ever specified that said you need something unique in order to obtain the form. All we really know is that Broly somehow got it during some point when, I guess, after he lost his tail and he was still triggered by the moon, and the Blood's waves may have allowed him to gain this form. So I don't think that, it'd be out of the question. And heck, even if you want to go by what the movie kind of show us, it seems like an intense rage may be able to draw out the power, which is something that definitely goes with the Ikari form, and the fact that it is very intense when it comes to the rage. But other than that, there's really no drawbacks. And so for something like in the beginning of Dragon Ball Z, this would be a pretty much good form for pretty much any Saiyan to have obtained or have, especially if they don't no longer have a tail but still want to be able to access the ability. And we can even kind of see some subtleties in early Dragon Ball. Now, we can't say for sure that Akira Toriyama was trying to go for this when he made the series, but if you guys always remember, one of my favorite moments I like to bring up constantly was the moment of when Goku first used the Ozaru Fist. Now, that's most likely not the officialized name for it, but it's when he is channeling the power of the Ozaru even without knowing it, and is able to ultimately gain the power he needs to defeat Demon King Piccolo. Now, I like to think that something like that showcases, if you guys need some esoteric explanation as to why he could obtain the form, I think that something like that kind of showcases that even if he, hasn't mastered his tail to the point of where he can use the Ozaru freely, or even if he lost his tail, he might still be able to access this form. But where I'm going to be placing it, like I said, is during pretty much the beginning. And so kind of the setup here is that everything that happens exactly the same throughout all of Dragon Ball, up until the point to where we get to Raditz. And now after Raditz comes down, pretty much the events do go the same way that they do naturally in canon, all the way up until the point to where Gohan is about to break out of the ship in order to crash into Raditz. Now, what usually happens is that Gohan has an increased power spike, and then he breaks out of the ship in order to save Goku because he feels his pain, right? Feels him in trouble, and he breaks out of the ship, and then is able to ultimately hit Raditz and weaken him enough to where Goku can get him into the full Nelson after Raditz kind of smacks him away, and then Piccolo's able to hit him off with the second special beam cannon. Now, we're going to actually change that up a little bit here. Whereas normally, like I said, Gohan would break out, this time around we're still going to have him do the same thing, which ultimately ends up getting Goku free from Raditz's grip momentarily. And Gohan decides to go and do the exact same thing as he does in canon, basically charging up his power because he doesn't want Goku to no longer get hurt, and it immediately charges towards Raditz. Now the big difference comes in is whereas normally Raditz is completely dumbfounded and caught off guard, especially once he sees the power spike from the attack, that he essentially kind of just stands there, because keep in mind, Gohan is not as strong as Raditz even when he does increase his power from his anger. He's still not as strong as Raditz, which would guarantee the idea that he could have actually avoided the attack, and that's a scenario that we're going to be going with here, whereas once Gohan is charging at Raditz, this time he utterly avoids the attack, basically catching back his senses within a moment's notice and manages to avoid the attack, although it does take a substantial more amount of power. In fact, it is close to his full power, and he recognizes how much of a threat Gohan is and immediately goes to charge at him and attacks him, especially now that Gohan's attack has failed and he's essentially utterly drained of power. He's essentially backing away and crying out for his dad, and Goku is begging Raditz to stop, as he does originally in canon, but this time around, Raditz just doesn't stop, and rather than doing one smack, he actually lays a beat down somewhat on Gohan, kind of kicking him around and then punching him over and over again. This instead puts a Gohan towards a state near death, whereas he was just originally knocked unconscious from the first blow. Here he is actually towards the point of near death, which is going to be the catalyst for pushing Goku over the edge. And so with that catalyst, Goku actually stands back up, although he does struggle to his feet. He begins to scream and shout at Raditz in complete and utter anger, screaming out to him in a fury, demanding to know why he would do such a thing. He's basically screaming, "How dare you," over and over again. His rage builds up so much that it becomes a fever pitch as Goku completely loses his mind, his eyes going blank for a moment, and then all of a sudden, a rage of power begins to go off of the scale. Raditz's scouter actually ends up overloading and completely exploding from the amount of power that was being unleashed. As the sky darkens, Goku's hair begins to spike, and suddenly once his pupils do return, because they had went blank for a moment, you get to see a hue of yellow in his eyes, and his black spiky hair is spiked up. Now I know what some people are going to say, well, with a premise like this, can't you just say, well, Goku has Super Saiyan early? And the reason why I don't think that Goku would get Super Saiyan early, and why I think that the Ikari form would work better, to kind of like deviate a little bit, is just because you need a certain level before you can obtain Super Saiyan. I mean, before Goku was even considered a Super Saiyan, he had to reach a power level over 90,000. And even then, in order to get the level that Captain Ginyu was suggesting that Goku was Super Saiyan, it was around 180,000. So I think you need to be a certain level. I think that you can have the right amount of emotion during this point of the story, but you would need a certain power level, certain battle power in order to achieve the form as well. So I don't think Goku's anywhere near, especially at this point in time, to where he would be able to achieve the form. So that's my personal opinion, and why I won't include this as a Super Saiyan, you know, what if Goku just obtained Super Saiyan early type of what if, and I'd rather stick with the Ikari form because I think it's far more suitable for him to achieve and for him to get. But anyway, back to the story. After Goku finishes raging out and charging up, Raditz can't actually believe the amount of energy coming off of Goku. He couldn't believe the power level, because what he read on the scouter right before it exploded was a power level over 4,000. And so Raditz begins to back away slowly in utter fear and terror, but his body just suddenly stops moving, as though he was paralyzed. Before he could even react, Goku was already in front of him. Goku slamming his fist right into Raditz's gut with a shot so powerful that not only does he rip through the armor, but actually punches a hole straight through Raditz's stomach, launching him upwards towards the air. Raditz can't even catch his breath as he begins to cough up copious amounts of blood as he goes flying right through the air, but Goku's already up above him and slamming his fist right back down into his face, knocking him towards the ground. Goku's still completely out of control at this point, rages up within the sky and charges up another Super Kamehameha wave. But rather than being able to get off the attack, he ends up convulsing and then losing the power completely before falling unconscious. Due to the fact that there was so much power that Goku began to channel through his body at once, and his rage constantly further fueling that power, it ended up being too much for him, and thus he lost the increase, passing out and falling towards the ground. But it doesn't really matter because the damage had already been done and Raditz was already on the verge of death. Piccolo, who had still been standing there utterly dumbfounded and confused, basically crapping his pants, ends up breaking out of his confusion because he hears Raditz laughing. essentially mumbling to himself in his final moments that he couldn't believe that his brother was this powerful, that he might even be the legendary Super Saiyan, because only the legendary Super Saiyan had ever showed such power and rage before within their legends. Piccolo essentially comes over to him, basically trying to see if he can get any more information out of him before he ends up ultimately finishing the job. But Raditz really wasn't in that much of a talkative mood, basically telling Piccolo to kind of F off, because it didn't really matter how strong Goku was, or what his power level may be, or even if he was a legendary Super Saiyan, because he didn't showcase any power that would worry his comrades. Piccolo was kind of confused and taken aback by this, until Raditz further explained that yes, he had two more comrades who were more powerful than him and Goku, or Kakarot as he would be calling him, and essentially saying that they would be on their way, that no matter what, the rest of the Earth would be finished, as the remaining Saiyans would come to take their revenge. Raditz began to laugh again, clearly still within his false delusions of triumph, basically uttering the idea that at least he got one of them. Even if it was his nephew, a kill is still a kill in his opinion. Piccolo basically snickers at this and tells Raditz that even if he did manage to somehow kill Gohan, which the fact that Gohan's energy is still there, although faintly, and Piccolo can sense it, he basically confirms to Raditz that he didn't, but that even if he did, it wouldn't have actually mattered, because they have something called Dragonballs on that planet, meaning that they would have easily just been able to wish him back to life, even if Raditz had gotten the job done. Raditz can only look up in more confusion before Piccolo used the key strike in order to finish him off, ending the conflict once and for all. From here, things go somewhat as they naturally would in canon, although there are a few changes here. With the fact that Goku is actually alive this time, there won't necessarily be him going to King Kai's right away anyway, because he'll essentially be within recovery, and he is still alive to actually begin to train with everyone else on the planet. As well as the fact that Piccolo's not actually going to be taking Gohan anywhere. In fact, he's going to actually be joining everyone else for training as well. So going forward, like I said, things pretty much progress as they naturally would in canon, except for after the gang arrives and comes to pick up both Goku and Gohan, who are essentially the only ones in that bad of a shape, whereas because Piccolo was able to essentially regenerate his arm, and he's mostly good. Piccolo does go about explaining the rundown to them as to what happens, and essentially telling them that they need to prepare, because the other Saiyans will be coming within that year time frame. Except Kami is going to actually be reaching out towards the gang here and essentially addressing the entirety of the group, saying that he actually wanted to bring Goku up to the lookout. And he wanted Piccolo to come along with him, and everyone else, the other Z-Fighters, to also come up there, because he has a special proposition for them in regards to their training, in order to help prepare them for the Saiyans. Piccolo is very hesitant to this at first because of his relationship with Kami, but ultimately begrudgingly goes with the rest of the group, who does make a pit stop towards Korn and also does return Gohan home to Chi-Chi after he does get healed by Korn, giving him a senzu bean, and they do neglect telling Chi-Chi exactly what happened. But they essentially just drop Gohan off and let him kind of hang out with Chi-Chi and do his own thing over there. Don't worry, Gohan is going to be involved in the story later, but here, especially after what happened, I think there'd be a lot more caution in getting him involved in any further fights, considering that Raditz just kind of beat the shit out of a child. I'm just going to be honest with you guys when I say this, his whole idea of being put into the fight, especially because he never really got a chance to show how good that hidden power was, nobody really wants him in the midst of that battle, because they do know he has that hidden power, and like I said, it may come into play later on. It just won't be usable right now, because ultimately it ended up not working, and so Goku rather keep his son safe rather than kind of like progress him more towards that warrior lifestyle, because he saw his hidden potential. So, like I said, Gohan's going to essentially go back with Chi-Chi, and everyone else is going to head up to the lookout. This includes all the Z-Fighters, and as well as Goku and Piccolo. Once the group gets up to Kami's lookout, he essentially gives a rundown as to what's going to be happening over the next year. Kami basically tells the group that he's going to take the majority of the Z-Fighters under his wing, which includes all the people that you guys already know. And he's going to take them under his wing because he still has more to teach them. Now, he recognizes that the evolution in their power can still be growth through his methods of training. However, when it comes to both Goku and Piccolo, he essentially acknowledges that they both have super exceeded him, especially with Goku's new power, which bringing that setup does actually make Goku go down into a bit of a sour mood because he doesn't even remember what happened to him. All he knows is that he lost that control and that he only felt the intense murder and rage. It actually brings him back to something that Raditz is bringing up in regards to his Saiyan nature and how he was a warrior. And this is all very conflicting towards Goku, but Kami tells him that it's nothing to really be ashamed of, that it's just something that's a part of his heritage, that ultimately it's going to have to be a part that he accepts about himself, and suggests that if he actually wants the best training and especially gaining control over that, he has an idea that he should train with a god that's even higher than him, which does shock Goku and Piccolo and the rest of the group at first because they had no idea that there were other gods that were even stronger and higher than the position than Kami was. But Kami says yes, there is a vast majority of gods out there who rank far above him, and so he actually suggests that he takes them over to King Yama's place so where then they can go and train with King Kai. Now basically saying that they would need that higher elevation of training because once again Kami had nothing further to teach both Goku and Piccolo, and saying that this would be the way that he can best help them going forward. And so essentially he does just that. Mr. Pope will go ahead and gets the rest of the group started on their training, whereas Kami heads off with both Goku and Piccolo in order to take them over to King Yama. And after the special request is granted, because I don't see why King Yama wouldn't, King Yama essentially allows both of them to end up going to train under King Kai. And so the journey to Snake Way begins, and Kami returns back to Earth to finish helping Mr. Popo in regards to training the rest of the group. And now from here, we're going to actually focus majority of our time in regards to the training on Piccolo and Goku's training with King Kai. And this is only because in regards to the Earthlings themselves, nothing is really going to be different. Even if you want to say that Kami pushes the group a little bit harder and therefore they get overall stronger, I don't think that anything in regards to their training is really going to change. Mostly just the same kind of training that Goku undertook with gaining power over their mind, fighting past warriors, kind of understand how specifically Saiyans fight, and things of that nature are going to be the more majority bulk in their training, because really nothing necessarily changed in the story that would garner them more training, if you would, that would be of higher extent. Otherwise, Kami might as well just send them all to King Kai. But again, I don't think he would necessarily do that, because he at least wants to get them down to a level to where he believes that they would be most suitable in helping out. So nothing will really change on their end. So like I said, we're going to be really focusing on the training between King Kai, Goku, and Piccolo, which after they make their way down the Snake Way, as per usual, I think this time around, especially due to the Zenkai boost that Goku got from him going into the Ikari state for the first time, and as well as the Zenkai boost he got from, fighting against Raditz in general and getting beat up, he's gonna actually be a little bit better here, especially when it comes to a lot of the tasks that he's going to have to undergo with King Kai in order to get acclimated to the 10 times gravity. Now, I think that Piccolo would struggle, but he would struggle as much as Goku and Kanon did. So I don't think he would struggle any more or really any less. Getting back to the training, King Kai, essentially goes down the process. They both end up making a joke or making him laugh. Well, maybe not Piccolo, but, Goku kind of just gets them both in regards to that. But they do go ahead and get started with the training. And like I said, Goku's going to be actually a lot more easily able to acclimate to the planet and acclimate to the task versus what he actually was originally in canon. And this is due to the fact that he not only got a power-up from his fight with Raditz, but he also got a power-up from his body being overwhelmed and overloaded with energy, and is starting to retain and remember that energy from him accessing the Ikari form. Now, I don't think that the training would go exactly the same after they get through the initial tasks. And the reason why is because I'm not actually going to have Goku obtain the Kaioken here. He does learn about the Kaioken, he does know about how to access it, but he's not going to actually use it. After having his heart-to-heart with Kami, or at least Kami, invoking that idea to him about his Saiyan heritage, and the fact that King Kai actually does go over to King Kai does that like he does in canon, essentially goes over the story of the Saiyans and their people. Goku is still ultimately conflicted about that, but he does understand that this could be a unique power for him that he would want to begin to process and begin to acclimate and use, because he doesn't want to come out of nowhere again, because what if he hurts a friend? What if he hurts his family? And so he doesn't want to lose control over this power anymore, and so he'd rather actually stick with that. And so King Kai basically having the Kaioken is kind of a shoo-in to help Goku with this, so it actually ultimately end up being right on Kami's part in order to send him here, so that way Goku can actually focus on it, because essentially the Ikari form is a power-up. It is still a power-up, not exactly like the Kaioken, but it is still ultimately a power-up, and with little to no drawbacks. You see, the Kaioken, if Goku tried to use it in the Time 10s during the Saiyan Saga, he most likely would have died. But here, using the Ikari state, which gives him that 10 times boost, is phenomenally greater than the Kaioken in this case. But King Kai can still help him learn to control and access it because he has a familiar technique. Now, as far as Piccolo concerns, he's going to take the Kaioken and essentially run with it. And due to his Namekian cells and biology, Piccolo's regeneration is essentially a gold standard for him accessing higher forms of Kaioken. So he's not going to be left behind in the training alongside Goku. In fact, he's going to increase exponentially, far greater than what he possibly could have been had he remained on Earth. And keep in mind, Piccolo on Earth, just training pretty much by himself and kind of doing sparring with Gohan, was able to reach maximum power levels massively greater than what he had than what he had at the early start of the Saiyan Saga versus what he had towards the end of it. So here I expect absolutely no different. In fact, him and Goku are going to get exponentially stronger, especially because when you have a stronger training partner, this goes for anybody in Dragon Ball, but particularly for Saiyans and pretty much Namekians, when you have a stronger training partner, you actually get exponentially stronger as well from the boost that it ultimately gives you. And so essentially, they're both are going to learn certain techniques that are going to be more suitable to them. Like I said, Goku won't learn the Kaioken, or at least he won't use the Kaioken, but he will learn it, and he will learn how to access it, but he just won't use it. He mostly is going to be focusing on the Ikari form, whereas Piccolo is going to be essentially spamming Kaioken. And there are other techniques that are going to separate them too. Like Goku is going to learn the Spear Bomb, but I think Piccolo can actually learn something that I did use in my last What If, in the What If Krillin was killed by a tambourine, because I did say that King Kai would have access to it. Yes, I was going off of a filler scene, but I think that it can be applied here. Again, I think that Piccolo can be a shoo-in for learning the instant transmission. So I think that that would be an actual good technique to learn aside. So they both get to have essentially an even split, really, when it comes to the amount of techniques that they're going to learn from King Kai. And pretty much another great thing about this is that once the year is up, since neither Piccolo nor Goku is dead, they can instantly come back without having to be wished back first. So that's another good thing that can actually go here, because it'll allow them to get back much faster, especially because they're going to be massively stronger than what they were in canon. So them getting back faster and getting there on time shouldn't really be necessarily a problem. But to once again kind of break it down and summarize for you guys, essentially in regards to the Earthlings, their training went pretty much the same as it did in canon. And then for Goku and Piccolo, their training got them exponentially increased. And they do learn techniques from King Kai, but they do favor certain techniques over the other when in regards to their uses. So Goku learned to access and harness his Ikari form, and he also learned the Spear Bomb technique. And Piccolo learned Kaioken and also instant transmission. But as of right now, that will bring us to the end of part 1 of What If Goku Obtained the Ikari State. I will be kicking off with a quick recap before getting into the next part of the story. When we last left off, due to the danger that his son had been put into, Goku achieved a crucial evolution that will ultimately reshape the Dragon Ball world as we know it. Him having achieved the fabled Ikari state, a specialized transformation that allows you to use the full power of the Azaru, but just in your humanoid form. With the unlocking of this power being the vital element that Goku needed in order to put down Raditz. Although he was not able to completely finish the job, the fatal blow had been dealt. However, Raditz did inform the rest of the group, through Piccolo, that 2 more Saiyans would be coming. And thus the group decided to prepare for the oncoming battle, as they train like never before for the fight of their lives. Alright, so as we're getting into the next part, there was a few things that I want to clarify and expound upon from the initial part, mainly revolving around the training aspect in relation to everyone getting stronger in order to combat the Saiyans. I want to specifically focus on something that I wanted to expound upon in relation to both Goku and King Kai's relationship into this, because I basically kind of said that once King Kai essentially parted the story onto Goku, Goku in relation to his Saiyan heritage and his people, that there was something that Goku was going to be able to learn from that in order to be able to ultimately get stronger, so that way he can be able to control this power and actually use the power. Now, I did want to go ahead and say that it wasn't just that he gave him that story. It was essentially him also explaining that the nature of the Saiyans and how that can acclimate to Goku's power and helping him control it. And like I said in the original part, the initial thing and reason why ultimately had Goku pretty much go up there to train with King Kai, along with Piccolo, but more so Goku in regards to this case, was the fact that King Kai essentially had a power-up very similar to what Goku did in the Kaioken. And thus I said that Goku essentially learning the Kaioken without activating it and using the Ikari form instead was the best way that he can utilize that power, as it would still be the same type of teaching method, given that it is ultimately a power boost, just with significantly less drawbacks than something like the Kaioken, which is another reason as to why Goku would want to use it over the Kaioken itself. But basically, I just kind of like wanted to expound upon that a little bit, and also kind of like where Goku's power level actually was when he was first traveling onto Snake Way. So essentially, as you can see on screen right now, Goku's power level had already upgraded to around 924, which is actually around the same level as the Super Kamehameha Wave, which I think would actually make the most sense in regards to the relation of the Zenkai boost that he would have received, as well as the Ikari boost, and then on top of that, receiving a Zenkai from the Ikari as well, as we do know that transformations and stuff like that do ultimately damage the body, especially in regards to a Saiyan, can also help increase their peaks and things of that nature, especially when it comes to them learning how to control it and through training mastering that transformation. So I think that Goku, when he essentially got better or he got healed, would have been around this level. I think that that's a comfortable level to put him with, and so as he's traveling on Snake Way, I think that that's probably was going to be his baseline level, traveling over to Snake Way to go to King Kai's as he's starting, which is why I said in the last part that a lot of the things that he kind of suffered from originally in canon, he would not be suffering from here in regards to getting used to the planet's gravity and things of that nature, and having a much easier time going through the cycle of training. I'm not saying it's going to be entirely non-difficult, but it'll just be significantly less difficult than it was in canon, as we can assume that he did get a power increase, but it was probably very negligible, as I don't think that Akira was really focusing on things like Zenkais up until later points within the story. And some people can argue that they probably didn't even really exist yet. I think that they necessarily did. I mean, it was kind of talked about as to why Goku as a kid was always getting stronger. It just may not have been mentioned to be a Zenkai boost, but that's essentially what it was. Either way, I think that here would have been significantly more so something that you can express that with. And I think that here versus in canon, where it would have been, like I said, pretty negligible in terms of the boost, I think here's actually a much greater boost than ever could have possibly have been during canon. So I think that here, that would be a comfortable level to where I would put him at. I wanted to go ahead and just express and expound upon those elements of the story, so that way you guys get a better understanding. That it wasn't just, once again, King Kai kind of like telling Goku about his story, but kind of like using that history to help motivate him and ultimately help Goku, you know, more so embrace that part of his Saiyan nature and use the power more effectively, as well as Goku having a higher baseline level than what he did originally in canon. But getting back into the story more properly, I actually want to go ahead and take it over to Vegeta and Nappa real quick. That way I can show you guys how a change in the story would ultimately influence them. As upon hearing what Raditz says, Vegeta most of all was taken aback. He couldn't actually believe that anyone had unlocked the quote-unquote legendary Super Saiyan form, that it was utterly ridiculous and preposterous. But he could not deny the ultimate fact, that the Scouter reading did show that Goku's power level was quote-unquote rising and rising, ultimately reaching a power level that soared way from what Raditz was initially reading off of. And so it could have been possible. He could have indeed been a legendary Super Saiyan. Despite Vegeta's pride, he knew that he would ultimately have to accept this and plan accordingly. So instead of quote-unquote just being angry and trying to rush immediately to Earth, Vegeta actually decides to hold himself back, humbling himself a little bit, and decides to tell Nappa that they're going to actually prepare. They do not want to go to Earth and ultimately get stopped by this quote-unquote legendary Super Saiyan before they had a chance to make their wish and achieve it. Given the fact that Vegeta's ultimate goal was to be able to defeat Frieza. And this could be a snag in the plan that, if not addressed properly, can ultimately spell his downfall. So basically what he tells Nappa is that they're actually going to train a little bit. Now, it's not going to be as long as the actual time skip, because I'm still going to have them roughly show up around the same time that they did originally. It's just going to be off by only a month. A month of training that Vegeta and Nappa are both going to do. And don't get me wrong, I will have them gain an exponential increase, but it won't be as significant as something like the Z Fighters or even Goku and Piccolo will be receiving, as they won't be training as intensely. As even though Vegeta is worried about Goku being a legendary Super Saiyan, once again, the power level that was being read off just went over 4,000. Now, Vegeta is smart, and so he understands that it wasn't necessarily the full power per se. However, Vegeta knows that he's much stronger now, but the way that Vegeta looks at it is that he ultimately wants to be prepared. And given the fact that Nappa is actually weaker, at least judging by the reading that they were able to get. And so, like I said, Vegeta would rather address the situation properly and not run into any snags in his plan, because ultimately, once again, he just wants to go ahead and defeat Frieza, but he knows he's going to need his wish in order to be able to do that. So him and Nappa decide to train. But right as Vegeta is explaining to Nappa exactly what they're going to be doing for their training, they end up being called into a meeting by none other than Frieza himself. Now, of course, this actually makes sense, as Frieza originally within canon was actually monitoring the situation as well, which is what ultimately led him going to Namek in order to seek out the Dragon Balls on his own. However, something that would be different about this timeline would be the fact that he heard on the line a Super Saiyan. This is what was reported to him, that somebody said that some Saiyan on Earth had become a Super Saiyan, which is ultimately why Frieza ended up calling the meeting. As first and foremost, he was ultimately dumbfounded by the idea that there were still other Saiyans that he didn't know about that existed on any other planet that wasn't already under his control, especially on the planet so far into the outskirts like Earth. But now to hear the idea that this so-called Saiyan who lives on this backwaters planet might be the fabled Super Saiyan, he must get some answers on this. And so in regards to the conversation that he ultimately ends up having with both Vegeta and Nappa, is just expressing the idea as to what they may know about certain information in regards to this Saiyan or any other Saiyans. Vegeta as stoic as ever and trying to play it as smart as possible without raising Frieza's suspicions, especially given to the fact that with the whole Dragon Ball situation, if Frieza did decide to ultimately go to Earth himself, this could spell doom for Vegeta altogether. And so his basic goal was trying to alleviate any of Frieza's fears and doubts. And so essentially he goes out of his way to try to convince Frieza to disregard Raditz's statements altogether. Basically explain to him the nature of the class system in regards to the Saiyan warriors of Planet Vegeta. Expressing the idea towards Frieza that it was virtually impossible for somebody of low birth to even have the necessary power to become an elite Saiyan, let alone a quote-unquote Super Saiyan. Essentially saying that Raditz must have just been talking out of his mind and just trying to play up the fact that he met an incredibly strong Saiyan. However, Vegeta points out that the Saiyan will be absolutely no threat to himself, and especially not a threat to Frieza, and pointing out that he himself will be willing to take full responsibility for this incident and go and handle the matter himself. Frieza gives a malicious smile and begins to chuckle to himself, basically hand-waving the situation away as a matter among monkeys, telling Vegeta that he was essentially free to do whatever he wants, but just to make sure that he got the job done. Whether he captured the Saiyan and brought him into the fold, or killed him, made no difference to Frieza. Vegeta bows and thanks him, still maintaining his neutral expression, although while in his head he is absolutely seething. Basically, he's wondering as to whether or not this was the only thing that Frieza wanted to talk to him about. His suspicions were answered when Frieza was asking if there was anything else that Vegeta would like to report in regards to what happened, because other than the whole Super Saiyan thing, there was something else that he might have heard in relation to why Raditz was actually on the planet, with Vegeta ultimately saying no, that there was nothing else, that the express reason as to why Raditz went there was to try and recruit his brother, but it seems that ultimately ended up failing. Frieza seemingly showed an expression of delight at this news, and finally dismissed Vegeta, once again telling him to get the job done quickly, asking as to when he would be heading out for this mission, with Vegeta saying that it should take no more than him and Nappa a few days to gather up the supplies necessary before they head for the planet. Frieza chuckles to himself again as he wishes Vegeta luck. And once alone after Vegeta leaves, Frieza looks towards Zarbon and Dodoria, telling them to go and immediately start making preparations, as they too would be leaving soon in order to head over to planet Namek. This is due to the fact that although he somewhat bought the information in regards to the whole Super Saiyan debacle, he did not want to dismiss everything Raditz said, alluding to the idea of the Dragon Balls, because although the Scouter was ultimately damaged by the uprising Goku's power, it was still somewhat functional, so that way you can hear. And what Frieza heard on the other end in regards to the Dragon Balls during the conversation with Piccolo that Raditz had, Frieza wasn't about to miss the opportunity to check out that information for himself, basically saying that it wouldn't matter even if there was a quote-unquote Super Saiyan that laid on Earth, as once Frieza got his wish of immortality, he would be the ultimate most powerful being in the universe, and would be more than enough to handle any foe that came his way. Back with Nappa and Vegeta, Nappa does inquire as to but Vegeta just dismisses him, telling him that they need to work quickly and immediately go off to go and do their training. But he does tell him that they would have to be doing this in secret, as most likely Frieza would be ultimately watching him, and they both are ultimately successful in this goal. Training in secret for a month, they ultimately get an exponential increase in strength. Satisfied with this level up, Vegeta tells Nappa that now is the time for them to head towards Earth. And of course, just like in canon, they would be there within the following year. Alright, hey guys, before we continue forward with this part, I did want to cut in here real quick because I know that I may have not mentioned it beforehand, but I did kind of mention it just within this part. I want to go ahead and correct the record on something because I know some people are going to call me out for it, but I am kind of like retconning one of the pieces of information that was pointed out within the first part in relation to the scouter that Raditz had, because I think originally I basically said that it exploded, and even in this part right here I do believe that I said that it exploded, so that was my bad. I wanted to say that Goku damaged it. He didn't explode it with his power, but he did ultimately damage it, which did destroy most of its functionality, but not in its entirety. So the message in regards to the Dragon Balls was still able to be heard, and then in relation to hearing about the Super Saiyan and all that was able to be heard as well. So the scouter once again was damaged, but it just wasn't exploded. Because I kind of like realized while going into this part of the script that I had kind of like had that down there to where it was oopsie doopsie. I said it had exploded when I meant to say it had been damaged. So this is kind of like a retcon to part one, as well as a retcon for this part as well. So I hope you guys aren't too mad. That was like a mistake on my end. I meant to say damaged, so that way we go ahead and get this information out. But other than that, we can go ahead and move forward with this part. And so the year has now gone and passed, and just like in canon, the Saiyans ultimately arrive, and pretty much things do go normally from there. And there will be, of course, some key differences that we're going to get into, but right now what I want to get into is, of course, everyone's favorite thing, power levels. So we're going to be starting off with the Earthlings and then going up into the Saiyans. I held off pointing out the Saiyans' new power level until now because I wanted to get everyone's basically out there right away, all as one big group that we can kind of go ahead and do. So we'll start off with, of course, the Z Fighters, and then we're going to go ahead and head it over into the Saiyans power level. Now, starting off with our weakest Z Fighter, that is going to be Chaozu, who basically, got strong, but, no real stronger than, like canon counterparts. Not like a huge significant margin, because I did say this like in the first part, but in regards to like the Z Fighters, barring, of course, Piccolo and Goku, everyone, although I did say that they would quote unquote be training just as intently and they would be pushed a little bit harder, I don't think it would necessarily yield that much of a significant growth here, because it's not like that, they would be training necessarily any harder than what they were originally. I mean, even with this knowledge of like Goku and Piccolo going to go train with King Kai, I think that Kami would push them harder, but ultimately they would see a significant increase as they do here, but it's not going to be like astronomical, right? As though they, had boosters with them, or as though they spend time in the Highball Time Chamber and what have you. But anyway, Chaozu, is at a power level of 1500, so pretty much he's as strong as Raditz. Next is rounding up is to Yajirobe, who's at 1700. It's a little bit over 1700, but that's the general gist. Going on, we have next is Yamcha, who is at 2800. Again, a little bit over, but that's the general gist of the power that he currently has. And then we're going up through Krillin, who has power level 3000. Now he has the most significant because originally in canon, he wasn't, that much higher than Raditz. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that he has the most significant, but he wasn't, that much stronger than Raditz originally when the time skip finished up. But now here, he has a power level of around 3,000. So yeah, definitely a lot stronger. Like I said, Kami would have pushed them harder, but you know, not necessarily to a point to where it'd be too extreme. Then finishing us up with the mainline Earthlings, as in like the human fighters, you do have Tien, excuse me, you do have Tien at a power level of 3,500, and then of course you have Piccolo, who's going to be at a power level over 10,000, and then you have Goku finishing us off here for the Z fighters with a power level over 23,000. And moving right along to the Saiyans, Nappa's new power level after the 1 month training is going to be a dead even 10,000, and Vegeta's new power level after training is going to be a dead even 27,000. Basically, like I said, they would do a month of training, but that's only to be, you know, prepared, because they wanted some of that preparation and they wanted to go ahead and get stronger, just in case that this whole Super Saiyan thing turned out to be a bigger deal than what it actually was. But, you know, they just wanted to be prepared for that. And as, you know, was pointed out in the story, Nappa was ultimately weaker than what the power level was showcasing for Goku when Raditz's scouter got damaged and basically they lost communication touch with the reading, and that was basically like the last thing that they got in regards to the power level. But yeah, other than that, this is what the new power levels are for everyone. Not too bad, but you can definitely see where there's a disparity within the power levels. But like I said, for the most part, this is pretty much good as to where they can be, and mainly regards to around Nappa and Vegeta's training. It was specifically kind of like to deal with the Super Saiyan, but they weren't training all too intently because, once again, Vegeta had essentially read out that he was already stronger than whatever power Goku showed, but they just wanted extra preparation, which again is why they are not astronomically higher, right? Because if I was giving them the boost that the Earthlings got, because for instance, I like to bring this up a lot, but in canon, I made it higher here, but in canon, Goku still got a 19 times increase. Now here, 25, and he's still not as strong as Vegeta with training. Okay, so, but still in canon, it was like a 19 times increase, and this pretty much went almost across the board. It wasn't as high as that for everyone, but essentially across the board, the Earthlings got dramatically stronger, but we do know that that is because of the intensity of training. We do know that Akira essentially pointed out that the harder you train for something, the more exponential your boost will be for it. So Vegeta and Nappa weren't training as seriously because their main goal was trying to make sure they were prepared for the Super Saiyan or a potential Super Saiyan. Anyway, with that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and go into exactly, you know, what's going to happen going forward in relation to the story. Now, like I said, pretty much certain things do go the same way as they do in canon. Goku and Piccolo are not here yet, but this is only due to the fact that because we had a little bit of overlap in regards to the time frame, they don't know that the Saiyans are here yet, and so they're still essentially on King Kai's planet during the last bit of training, because the idea was that they were supposed to come within a year. And so they now arrive, but they're just a little bit later than that. And so that's why Goku and Piccolo aren't here. But the other Z fighters do sense the two Saiyans and essentially show up to go ahead and do their thing. And just like in canon, Nappa goes ahead and releases Cybermen, and the Cybermen attack. But pretty much any one of the Z fighters at this point can take down the Cybermen, and they wouldn't have much trouble at all. Even Yajirobe and Chaozu. Well, maybe not so much Chaozu, but Yajirobe, because the Cybermen are as strong as Chaozu, but you know, with his psychic abilities, I mean, hell, him and Yajirobe can do like a little team up if they wanted to, and just take down multiple. But Yajirobe by himself, keep in mind, Yajirobe's power level here is pretty much around the same power level that Krillin was in canon, and Krillin basically took out all of the Cybermen. And we know for a fact that in Dragon Ball, even if your power gap is not that significant, you can still, because the way Akira put it, as long as you have something like a 2 times increase, but even if it's a little bit less than that, but yeah, if you have like a 2 times increase, you know, something that's very nebulous, very marginal, you can still overwhelm pretty much any opponent, even if there's multiple of them. So it wouldn't necessarily matter because you'll just be that much stronger and faster. So they could do that, but most likely I would just give it to Yamcha because I think he would still step up first here. And pretty much with his higher power level here, even if the Cybermen did try to explode, I think the Yamcha can break out and ultimately deal with him. And I would just say that pretty much everyone just cleans up from there. It would be absolutely no challenge, but that's pretty much going to be the easiest it gets for them, because then we have Nappa stepping into the ring, and oh boy. So with that increase in his power level of 10,000, now see, even originally, Piccolo was actually close enough to his power level at around 3,500, pretty much the same power level that Tien is right now, and he still was kind of getting dog walked. I'm not even gonna lie to you guys. What happens here is an utter catastrophe. It's an absolute slaughter, especially because Nappa's now at a power level of 10,000. The Z Fighters know that they are completely out of their depth. They don't really stand a chance, even they all team up, but they do the best that they can, but casualties do ensue because of Nappa being so much stronger and faster this time around, and the fact that because him and Vegeta are more so in a rush, and also they prepared for, again, the Super Saiyan. They didn't prepare for any of these guys because, you know, they just assumed they'd automatically be stronger, and now they are just significantly stronger. So Nappa kind of like just does away, not really taking any more time than he needs to, and essentially we start having drop-offs. So Yajirobe dies. He essentially gets putt-kitted so hard that he kind of explodes. Like, Nappa literally just shoves his foot right through this guy's gut, like just caves in Yajirobe's chest. He's dead, dusted. Chaozu does try to hold him with, you know, like psychic barriers and things of that nature, tried to hold him down, but it doesn't matter because Nappa just overpowers that. And then when Tien tries to jump in to help out Chaozu, he ends up getting his arm cut off. Chaozu, of course, still tries to go for the self-destruct, but it doesn't work. Tien, who wasn't even close in canon, is still not close here, and he's actually even further away here, and ultimately ends up just being murdered. This leaves us down to our last two fighters, pretty much, Krillin and Yamcha. Now, of course, Goku and Piccolo are already aware, and before Nappa can deliver a finishing blow over to Yamcha after he kind of like just beats them up a little bit, before he can deliver a finishing blow, he's instantly punched in the face by none other than Piccolo and Goku, both arriving there instantly via instant transmission. And so they don't actually have time to pick up any senzu beans because they did just arrive there instantly. So like they came immediately from King Kai's all the way to being here. So Yamcha and Krillin are still kind of like on the brink, but that's going to be fine for right now because now it's going to be Nappa and Vegeta versus Goku and Piccolo. And pretty much the battle lines get drawn and immediately start. Wasting no time at all, both Goku and Piccolo power up to their maximums within base and immediately go charging. You have Piccolo versus Nappa, and then you also have Goku versus Vegeta. And since it's so much closer here, with actually Piccolo being the stronger of between him and Nappa, and Goku only being not that much weaker than Vegeta, but pretty much around the kind of like not as significant as it was in canon, but pretty much around that same gap of power. It actually goes, you know, a lot better. They essentially are trading blows back and forth, both groups, but Piccolo quickly gains the upper hand over Nappa, essentially using a few techniques in his arsenal that he usually doesn't use, such as the giantification that he actually budges out. They kind of stomps Nappa into the ground with, kicking him across the field. Nappa does get angry and over his volcanic explosion, but it ultimately doesn't work on Piccolo as he manages to teleport out of the range and come back into view, slamming right into Nappa's back. Before Nappa can go flying farther away, Piccolo stretches his arm and begins to choke out Nappa with the intent of trying to strangle him to death. Meanwhile, with Goku and Vegeta, their battle was far more intense, pretty much still going similar to how it does in canon, just like I said, with a far more intensity. As Vegeta, like I said, did indeed prepare for fighting the Super Saiyan, so he actually is kind of mocking Goku somewhat because although he is surprised at the large level of power, he was glad that he was right in order to prepare. So like I said, he ends up ultimately mocking him and saying that it doesn't even matter if he is a so-called fabled Super Saiyan because it's seemingly enough as though Vegeta has finally gained the upper hand and that he's even stronger than a supposed Saiyan of legend. Begins to pummel Goku and knocking him back. Goku is still somewhat keeping into the fight, but it is quickly being shown that the tide is turning against him. In the midst of their fight, sees what is happening to Nappa and decides to help him out. shooting a flaming ki blast at Piccolo, which ultimately ends up getting him off of Nappa, allowing Nappa to now gain the upper hand as he begins to pummel down onto Piccolo. But Goku, wanting to jump into the fight immediately and stop Vegeta from doing anything else, he immediately gets back into it. However, nothing really changed in between the last exchange that they had, Vegeta basically noting that it doesn't matter once again, even if Goku is a so-called Super Saiyan, that he mocks his power because he is a Saiyan elite. He is the ultimate Saiyan. And that a battle with him was a battle to the death, a battle so intense that no one could prepare for it. Goku basically retorting that even a reject can surpass an elite if he trained hard enough, and that he was going to quote-unquote show him exactly what his power could really do. Goku begins to charge his ki, and as the sky darkens and thunder starts to rain, Goku's muscles start to bulge as his ki becomes more violent. His eyes turn a bright shade of yellow before his hair spikes up. The increase this time around being more than enough to shatter the scouters of both Vegeta and Nappa. And although Vegeta could not sense energy, he could definitely feel the pressure and knew that he was in immediate danger, but his body had been completely paralyzed, not realizing that this was none other than the emotion of fear. It had suddenly overtaken him, but within the blink of an eye, before he could even react, Goku was slamming a hard fist right into his face, pretty much almost knocking Vegeta's jaw off. But Goku wasn't finished yet, and with the intense rage of seeing his friends' dead bodies fueling him, he immediately began to beat down on Vegeta, hitting him with combo after combo. Punches, kicks, knees, grapples, anything inside of Goku's arsenal that he could use. In regards to his martial prowess, he was using to their fullest extent, to lay an absolute beatdown onto Vegeta. Nappa was completely dumbfounded. He couldn't even believe that somebody could be this strong. But then he starts to hear a chuckle, a laughter from behind, as Piccolo regains himself after having been knocked down by Nappa. Nappa could have sworn that he was dead from that last attack. How was he able to stand up after that? But Piccolo says you shouldn't underestimate the people of Earth. Looking over to Goku, he basically smiles and says that now it's time for him to get serious as well, which began to force Nappa to stumble back as he was questioning the very reality of the situation. There was no way Piccolo was holding back. He couldn't possibly believe it and told him to stop bluffing. Piccolo then smirks maliciously and states firmly to Nappa that he wasn't bluffing, that he'll show him the true power of the Demon King Piccolo, shouting out Kaioken before being encompassed by a fiery red aura, instantly charging at Nappa and vanishing from his sight. Nappa can only feel searing pain as he looked down towards himself after Piccolo had vanished in order to see Piccolo had reappeared with a gut punch directly into Nappa, one so hard that it ended up cracking his armor. Nappa then stumbled back and completed another shock, coughing up blood as he fell to one knee, basically screaming out that this was impossible. And he was cursing him, saying, "Damn you, you Namekian slug." The comment of a Namekian actually did take Piccolo back for a second, but he paid it no real mind, just uttering to Nappa that this was the end for him, before preparing to charge at him for another attack. And as always, we're going to be doing a quick recap before continuing on with this latest part. So on the last part of this What If, the Saiyan invasion had begun, with both Nappa and Vegeta touching down on the Earth, ready to run the ones with our entire Z team, ready to kick ass, take names, and give the entire planet a bad case of the explosions. But of course, coming to the defense of the inhabitants was Earth's Special Forces, and whereas initially they were able to put in the work dealing with the Cybermen rather easily, when it came down to fighting the Saiyans themselves, that was a whole other story, as Nappa essentially picked apart most of the team, leaving only Yamcha and Krillin to be the last ones left standing before Piccolo and Goku finally showed up in order to save what was remaining of the Z team, and they began running the hands with both of the Saiyan invaders. And whereas at first it did seem like an even split, the fights going back and forth, it quickly became apparent that our heroes' training actually paid off, and they were much stronger than what they appeared to our foes. Even though our foes themselves had indeed gotten stronger, they were essentially no match for the power-ups that were coming by way of the Kaioken and also the Ikari form being used by both Goku and Piccolo, allowing them to quickly turn the tables on the invaders and start to put a hurt on them. The last part ending where both Piccolo and Goku had essentially taken off the weights and decided to quit playing around and get serious in order to finally put an end to this invasion once and for all. And we'll be picking up with the conclusion of this battle right now. Back up immediately where we last left off with Piccolo standing before Nappa after just laying a hurt on him after summoning up the power of the Kaioken. Piccolo essentially tells Nappa once again that he's essentially going to finish him off right here and now, that he's no longer going to be playing any games, especially with the idea that now Goku has gotten serious, activating his Ikari state. Although he is only using a ×5, it is still more than enough to be putting the hurt on Vegeta. Piccolo figures that it's finally time to end this and that he's done playing around with Nappa. Nappa, completely looking dumbfounded and out of ideas of what to do, begins to formulate a plan inside of his head, trying to come up with any sort of solution in order to deal with this. Piccolo was so much stronger than what he anticipated, and that he's far beyond him, and especially with this Kaioken or whatever, Nappa has absolutely no idea as to what to do next, in order to be able to stave off what seems like his inevitable end. But back with the fight between Goku and Vegeta, we see the Prince of No Saiyans completely on his knees and worn out, groveling on the ground, essentially begging God, anybody that he possibly can, to understand why is this happening to him, that he's supposed to be an elite of the elite, and that he essentially trained for this. Could he really be that strong, is what he kept thinking to himself. Could it really be that this so-called legendary Super Saiyan was that powerful? He knew of the legends and he knew of the myths, but he never thought that he would be actually facing one today. And considering what he was always told growing up, he thought that it would be him, given that his elite blood, the blood of a noble prince, should be the one, if anybody, to obtain such a legendary state of form. But the fact that it was given to a low class, someone who was nothing more than a piece of trash at birth, and sent off to go conquer some dead water planet that nobody would actually give a shit about. Vegeta couldn't even begin to start to fathom the idea as to what was going on. It was like a nightmare. This was like standing against Frieza at his peak of power. And even then, Vegeta thought to himself that this would be his inevitable end. Goku began to walk closer to him, bearing down on him. Vegeta can still feel the intense pressure and heat of his angry glare. That immense pressure that Vegeta was feeling continued to force him to his knees, not even allowing him to lift his head to look at the menace that was now being presented before him. But Vegeta, still wanting to save face and hold on to whatever last bit of pride that he had, decided to go for another desperate gamble, essentially blasting off towards the sky, channeling every ounce of willpower that he had left in order to do so, getting high up into the air and starting to formulate one of his most powerful techniques, the Gun, essentially yelling down to Goku, or Kakarot as he would be called, him, to dodge this next attack, but that if he did, just know that the entire planet and that everyone else that he knew and loved would be obliterated. Of course, Goku stood there in silence, just merely looking up at Vegeta with an uninterested glare, basically telling Vegeta that he was absolutely worthless. Vegeta could pick up on this, and it only made him angrier, as he charged up the attack even more before shouting Gun fire. But Goku didn't formulate a Kamehameha as you would see naturally within canon. Instead, Goku simply held out one hand, and as the attack got closer and closer, within the next few feet, before it actually touched or made contact with his hand, Goku was able to stop it with sheer force of will, essentially creating a type of barrier around it, and in which point Goku used that barrier to actually grab the key and manipulate it itself, spinning around before throwing the key attack back at Vegeta, redirecting it towards him. Vegeta couldn't believe it. His attack had been completely taken over by Goku. It's as if it was mere child's play. And then as Goku threw it, he actually boosted the attack with his own ki, making it even stronger than what Vegeta could have even remotely handle or bounce back. Vegeta knew right then and there that it was all over, taking the attack head on and being absolutely decimated by it. And unlike in canon, given the amount of power that Goku is now channeling, Vegeta was virtually near the point of death after this. Essentially, he had absolutely nothing left in the tank and had given into complete despair. Falling back down towards the ground, he essentially landed there, staring up at the sky, still thinking to himself that this was a nightmare and that it couldn't be real. Vegeta just laid there, accepting his inevitable defeat, realizing that all of his frustration, that all of his anger, that all of his pride amounted to absolutely nothing, and that this would be the end, dying on some nameless rock without ever having really achieved anything in his life. At least in regards to his goals. He couldn't even defeat Frieza, and he lost to a low class. But on top of that, he wasn't even the legendary Super Saiyan. It was that very same low class who now had him completely at his mercy. But the end that Vegeta was expecting would never come, as rather than ending his foe immediately, Goku ended up powering down. This was shocking to Vegeta, and with the last bit of strength that he had, he essentially asked Goku why. Why would he spare him? Why wasn't he finishing the job? Isn't he supposed to be the legendary Super Saiyan, the almighty bloodthirsty warrior who kills without mercy, who slaughters everyone in his path? without remorse? Vegeta's words did ultimately strike a chord with Goku, but not necessarily the whole Super Saiyan thing, as Goku had no idea what that was. But it was the latter part of his response that really did touch a chord with him, Goku remembering exactly what happened back when he slaughtered Raditz. As keep in mind, Goku's philosophy hasn't necessarily changed here. The idea that he will not kill without reason. Basically in the sense that if he can quote unquote give his opponent the opportunity to change their ways, especially after they've been defeated, that he would rather try to take that path versus killing them. And then on a personal note, he never wanted to feel like that again, as despite all of Goku's training in order to gain control, which is exactly why he was training to gain control in the first place, was essentially because of what happened, and how he still felt some sense of unease, how he still felt some sense of trauma from exactly what happened when he lost control and when he became a wild beast. While pondering these thoughts in his head, he actually begins to explain his philosophy to Vegeta, essentially telling him as to what happened, and being vulnerable towards him, expressing the idea as to why he wouldn't just want to needlessly kill him. Vegeta couldn't believe what he was hearing. He couldn't believe that this so-called legendary Super Saiyan was somebody who was so ruthless, so callous, so efficient in his amount of destruction that he could wield, the amount of power that he could unleash, but yet was so gentle that he wouldn't even hurt a fly. Hearing Goku's words sparked a fury in him shouting and cursing at Goku, essentially calling him a coward and calling him pathetic, saying that he's no Super Saiyan, that he's not even worth being called a Saiyan at all. With Goku's only response being that maybe he's right, but that's not the way that Goku exactly sees it. The way that he posits the idea is that he is indeed a Saiyan, but he's a Saiyan that was raised on Earth, acknowledging that yes, he does wield great destructive power, but that he has an even greater responsibility to protect those that he loves, to protect the planet that raised him, that didn't turn its back on him when he could have been, like Vegeta, someone vicious and ruthless, without remorse, who did not care about anything more than the next fight, willing to destroy countless innocents for meaningless pleasure, telling Vegeta that he was thankful for coming to this planet, and that it did change him in the way that he was, and that it changed him from the way that he could have been, and how it shaped him into the man that he is, expressing to him that it is not weakness to value life, and that killing innocent is wrong, because he knows that deep down, anybody who would hurt the innocent is just scared that one day that a bigger fish would come and do the same to them, that they would be the helpless child, massacred by someone that couldn't give a damn about anything but mass slaughter, but saying that he isn't like that, and that in fact he wants to impart this lesson to Vegeta, the idea that yes, there is a bigger fish, and there always will be a bigger fish, and that it can help you grow stronger, to learn from it. But in this case, rather than seek your absolute destruction, this fish is giving him a chance to reflect, learn, and grow from his mistakes, giving him a chance to become a better man. Vegeta's eyes widened. He was completely enraged now, gritting his teeth so hard that his gums began to bleed, basically forcing himself to sit up so he can shout at Goku again, essentially calling him selfish, saying that he was a Saiyan just like him, that was absolutely nonsense what he was speaking, expressing the idea that such attachments are foolishness, and that he needs nothing but his own strength, him screaming once again that Goku was a fool, saying that he was too naive to take on any real monsters, any real threats, given the fact that they would never be swayed by such pitiful words, screaming at him once again that with such a naive outlook on life, there was no way that he can be considered a legendary Super Saiyan, let alone a Saiyan of any kind, expressing that it was ignorant for him to believe that he even had an iota of pride about the strength that he was given, strength that should only belong to the noble elites, the true royals, with the birthright, status, and pride of a warrior to match. But Goku just sighed in frustration, more so in disappointment, closing his eyes before opening them again and looking towards Vegeta, shaking his head, expressing the idea that he can only hope that one day he learns this lesson. But we transition back over to Piccolo and Nappa, but going back a few moments before the end of the fight between Goku and Vegeta. And we see Nappa once again sweating profusely, thinking of a way to try to get out of this situation, trying to ponder any idea or plan or battle strategy that he could come up with, but Piccolo would not be giving him that chance as he smiled menacingly before shouting, "Kaioken ×3!" immediately shooting up his ki dramatically, and beginning to rush at Nappa. Nappa, in desperation, tries to perform an XD bomber at Piccolo in the hopes that it would do something, anything, getting off the attack, which does for a moment stop Piccolo in his tracks, as a white flash and an explosion can be seen. Once the dust clears, Nappa's hoping that he got him, and seeing that there was nobody left, he begins to laugh out loud, thinking that he actually managed to vaporize him. Unfortunately, that laughter was suddenly replaced with screams of agony, as Piccolo had shown up again, easily dodging the attack and kicking Nappa straight into the ribs, completely shattering his rib cage on his left side. Nappa grabbed onto that side in extreme pain, falling to his knees, but like I said, Piccolo would not give him a chance for reprieve, before kicking him straight into the chin, launching him upwards, before slamming him back down once again into the ground. Now in the sky, Piccolo begins charging up his energy, prepared to deal out the final blow towards Nappa, charging up an energy attack to finish him off with. But before he can truly start the process, a huge light is seen in the distance, distracting both of the two and causing them to look over, as they see a large beam of energy shooting downwards before being redirected back up, and then hitting a target, causing a large explosion, after it was redirected upwards. Neither Piccolo nor Nappa know exactly what happened, but they can assume that that was the clash between both Goku and Vegeta coming to a conclusion, or at least taking a turn. But the distraction was enough for one of our fighters who had still been remaining to come out of hiding to try to use the technique to end Nappa once and for all. This being none other than Krillin, who had come out with the Kienzan. Had he not shouted the attack, he might have actually caught Nappa off guard and finally finished him. But unfortunately, Nappa regained his senses just in time in order to be able to dodge the attack, with Krillin shouting "damn it" before looking towards Nappa's direction, along with Yamcha jumping in trying to hit Nappa with a wolf fang fist, but this is where Nappa smiles deviously, realizing he had a golden opportunity. Rushing forward with the last bit of his energy, he knocks Yamcha out of the way. Given the fact that they are both severely injured, Nappa would still be the stronger of the two, immediately rushing over with his speed in order to catch Krillin off guard and placing him in a grip and a chokehold, shouting up towards Piccolo, who had now regained his senses as well, looking down towards Nappa after he shouted up to him to try and get his attention. Piccolo grits his teeth in anger and frustration, seeing that the situation has now gone sideways, because Nappa is threatening to kill Krillin if Piccolo doesn't surrender. Piccolo does reluctantly descend towards the ground, basically looking over to Nappa and agreeing to the idea of surrender. But little did Nappa know this was actually a part of Piccolo's plan, recognizing now that the only way that he was going to succeed was by allowing for a sacrifice to happen, given the fact that Piccolo knew that even if he did try to go up into a Kaioken, that it wouldn't be a guarantee, considering that Nappa was mere moments from snapping Krillin's neck. And so with that, Piccolo formulated a plan in his mind, subtly gathering up the energy that he had started while he was still up in the sky and continue gathering it into 2 fingers, as he slowly began to approach Nappa, looking as though he was actually surrendering. Since Nappa could not sense energy, he did not know what Piccolo was doing, not feeling the ki building up into his 2 fingers, laughing maniacally, finally thinking that he's won. And so while he approached, he quickly sets up a telepathic link with Krillin, basically informing him of the situation and that what he's going to have to do, Piccolo asking for Krillin's forgiveness, with Krillin letting him know that he can do what he had to do, that it was entirely okay, that no matter what, he had to avenge his friends and stop this monster. And with that, Piccolo takes a moment to steel himself before stopping dead in his tracks, confusing Nappa for just a second, but that was all the second that he needed. Finally showing what he had been doing, he shouts out in quick succession, "Mankako Sapo," before firing the special beam cannon straight through both Krillin and Nappa, practically hitting the two in an instant before Nappa had time to react, killing both of them instantly. Yamcha was completely in shock before crying out for his best friend, screaming Krillin's name in anguish. Piccolo himself had a somber look upon his face, but recognized that he did what had to be done. And not long after that, Goku showed up as well, having only seen the last part of the exchange. He walked over to Piccolo, with Piccolo apologizing, saying that he was sorry, but he did what he had to do. Goku walked over to him and just grabbed onto his shoulder, telling him that he understood. The two couldn't dwell on it too much, as Piccolo was the first to notice as the space pod in the distance came down, and as quickly as it came down is as quickly as it left, with Goku explaining what happened over there in regards to that situation with him and Vegeta. Whereas Piccolo didn't necessarily agree with Goku's reasoning entirely, he understood where he was coming from. The two men going over to Yamcha to help aid him and give him some medical attention. Luckily for Yamcha, there were indeed centipedes on hand, which basically healed him up right away. Sometime later, we see the group at Kame House, along with a few others like Master Roshi, Bulma, and even Kami. The group sit around and discuss the recent events that has transpired, positing the question as to where do they go from here, because whereas most of the people who died on the battlefield can be brought back with Earth's Dragon Balls, and considering that both Kami and Piccolo are still alive, this wouldn't be necessarily a problem, but people like Chaozu and Krillin have already died once and therefore can't be brought back anymore, through the means of Earth's Dragon Balls. Eventually, Piccolo chimes in with the solution of using the Namekian Dragon Ball, with everyone being aghast as to what he was talking about. Essentially, Piccolo goes over a story back when him and Goku were training with King Kai. Back then, after Goku had learned about his history and his people's origin, Piccolo actually got pretty curious about his own origins and his own people, especially considering that Goku was able to unlock a transformation that seemingly was enough unique to his race. Piccolo thought that with him being a demon and all, that there might be something unique to his race as well. King Kai didn't nip that in the butt, telling him that he's not actually a demon whatsoever, that he comes from a race called the Namekians, which completely shocked Piccolo, as this was the first time Piccolo was hearing anything about his race, not knowing anything about the Namekian people that King Kai was speaking of. He had never even heard of them up until now. And so just like for Goku, King Kai goes over the rundown of Piccolo's entire race and it's them, as far as his knowledge goes in regards to them. With Piccolo being fascinated by what he heard, back in the present, he essentially exclaims the idea that it must be possible that other Namekians would have created Dragon Balls just like Han, and that it was a bit of a long shot, but that it was worth a try to see whether or not if they could use the Dragon Balls to perhaps bring both Krillin and Chaozu back to life. Both Goku and Yamcha get excited at the news, but that's when Bulma chimes in saying, "Wait, how do you guys plan on getting there?" Expressing the idea that before today they had never even heard of Namek, let alone know where Namek is. The group does look saddened a little bit as their expressions become sunken in, with Goku saying that that was true, but that it wouldn't matter as long as they can get some sort of directions towards Namek, then perhaps they can use instant transmission to get there. But that's when the voice on high comes down speaking to them, and it's none other than King Kai, expressing the idea that that may not be possible, given the fact that they just learned the instant transmission and they're not as well versed with it as somebody like him would be, or even the originators of the technique, that of course being the people of Yardrat. Both Goku and Piccolo gain a sour expression on their face, but King Kai lets them know that not all hope is lost, as he can at least provide the coordinates in order for them to be able to get to Namek. With Goku chime in, that still doesn't clear up the problem of how they get there, with Bulma finally perking up once more, saying that she would find a way, essentially saying that she would get started on working on a ship that could potentially take them there, pointing out that she already had an idea as to where she would get the necessary materials, and thanks King Kai for helping them out with directions, saying that it would help them out tremendously in regards to programming the ship to take them where they needed. Yamcha runs over, hugging Bulma and giving her a kiss on the cheek, calling her the best girlfriend ever. This does make her blush a little bit before she playfully pushes Yamcha away. And so with everyone's excitement renewed, everyone gets to work. They want to go ahead and get the priorities out the way, so that means Kami does indeed gather up the Dragon Balls and wish everyone back to life who he can. This of course ends up restoring both Tien and Yajirobe, who do indeed get the rundown as to what has happened. Understanding what the plan is, they're entirely on board, with Tien electing himself to go on the mission to Namek with the rest of the group. However, Yajirobe does choose to stay behind. Everyone does get his reluctance and says that there's no hard feelings. The more good news will come from Bulma, who informs the group that they actually have one of the Saiyan ships that were still left, that it was currently in custody, and that she was going to acquire the ship so that way they can use its schematics and blueprints in order to build them, hopefully a much larger variant, expressing the idea that it was a ship that was built for space travel and would help them greatly in not only advancing their own space travel capabilities, but also getting the group over to Namek. Unfortunately, this wasn't as good as news as they thought they were, as when Bulma tried pressing on the remote control in order to activate the ship to see if they can get it to fly, it actually ended up blowing up, which ended up causing somewhat of a meltdown among the group, thinking like what were they going to do now? But the group is not entirely out of hope, as Kami comes bearing more good news about a potential solution, and the group does end up acquiring the old Namekian spaceship that Kami came into Earth in, with Bulma and her father getting to work right away, re-outfitting the ship for use. Kami also apologized, basically saying that he actually had the opportunity to wish everyone back to life, given the fact that he could have actually upgraded the Dragon Balls, but it was something that actually slipped his mind, and now that the Dragon Balls were inactive for a year, there was really no use dwelling on it now. Piccolo is the only one who gives him a real mouthful about it, but everyone else kind of lets it go, understanding that it was probably just one of those old man mistakes. And so with all that being said, some more time passes after the fact, with the group learning that it's going to take about 6 months for the ship to be prepared for them to be able to travel in, and that Bulma was adding in some special things that can probably help them train and grow even stronger. The group was a little bit disappointed by this, but they're ultimately okay with it. And King Kai even chimes in to help mold things over by expressing the idea that he's training both Krillin and Chaozu as we speak, essentially saying that he will continue to take care of them until it's time for them to get revived. And so that leaves us with the waiting game as Bulma continues to prepare the ship. And with that, we'll be leaving off with this part right here. I hope you guys really did enjoy. Of course, like, favorite, subscribe, send it all around, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace. To all my Gummy Knights, new and old, just remember, this is a man's world, but it would be nothing without his brain and his bronze. And lying is indeed the most fun that a woman can have, without taking off her clothes. Good night.